Hello, license holders. Welcome. This is our 201 live webinar. I'm Siobhan McGuire. I'm the Copyright Education and Outreach Specialist for One License. We usually hold an annual new user webinar during the first quarter of the year, but for the past few years, thanks to feedback from license holders like yourselves, our team has been inspired to create several new webinar opportunities to assist license holders at all comfort levels. And today's One License 201 webinar was designed with our intermediate users in mind. Many of you are folks who have been using our service for quite some time and are reasonably comfortable with what One License is and what your responsibilities as a license holder are. And our hope for today is that you would learn some new tips and tricks for your One License and copyright knowledge, as well as that we would answer as many of your questions as possible. Since this is a 200 level webinar, we're coming to this session with the assumption that you're familiar with One License 101 live webinar, that you either attended that webinar in February or that you've watched the recording. But even if you aren't familiar with those intro level topics, please know that you are welcome here today, and you can always go back and watch that 101 recording later. But just be aware that our starting point for today is going to be just a little bit more advanced. Our webinar today will be recorded, and we will share that recording in our upcoming July newsletter, as well as on our blog, news.onelicense.net. That blog site is an excellent resource for all the latest news from One License, and Madison and David, whom you'll meet very soon, will be sharing several helpful links from that blog in our chat throughout the webinar today. And now I'd like to introduce David Taba, our bilingual ministry specialist, who will offer a few housekeeping notes for our conversation today.
Thanks, Siobhan. Hi, everyone. Whether you're with us live today or watching the recording, we're so glad that you're here, and we hope that the information that we're sharing in this webinar will help you get the most out of your One License permissions. Just a few housekeeping notes today as we begin our time. This webinar will be no longer than 1 hour in length. All you need to participate is speakers or headphones so that you can hear us. There's no need to have a microphone or video camera since you are an audience member today. Feel free to grab a writing utensil if that would be helpful to you, or maybe open up a Google Doc so that you can take notes throughout the webinar today if you like. Our time together will be divided into 4 parts. First, we'll spend some time digging into the different license types with Siobhan. Then, Madison will talk about how to correctly display permissions. And then after that, I will spend some time looking at how to read copyright information. And then finally, we'll wrap up with a live question and answer session at the end. At the end of the webinar, a brief survey will pop up in your browser. If you could take a few minutes to respond, we would really appreciate that. You can say as much or as little as you like, and you can skip any questions that you don't want to answer. Some are open-ended questions, some are multiple choice. Quite simple, low-key. We always find these survey answers helpful. And to tell us a little bit more about our Q&A session, I'd like to introduce Madison Connor.
Thanks, David. If you are here with us live, you can click on the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen and then type your question directly into that box. We will be monitoring that throughout our time together, and we will do our very best to answer each of those questions live. Over the last few days, we've also received questions from some of you through our online ticketing system. So please know that we will be including many of those questions as well. If you are watching the recording or have a question that is specific to your organization, our online ticketing system is going to be the best and fastest way for you to get in touch with the One License team. You can email us at info@onelicense.net or log into your account and submit your question through the contact link in the upper right-hand corner. One feature of our ticketing system is that if you're logged into your account and send us a message through the contact link, all of your account information, such as license number and the organization name, will all automatically be sent to us along with your request. This is really helpful for the One License team and allows us to find your account much more quickly. Feel free to write webinar in the subject line of your message and know that we will respond by email typically within 2 to 3 business days. And now I'll hand things over to Siobhan McGuire, who will kick us off with some information about the different types of licenses.
Well, thanks, Madison. So today I'm going to talk about the options that one license offers for licensing copyright usage and some ways that our licenses might support your ministry. We have three licenses: the reprint license, the podcast streaming license, and the recorded audio license. I'm going to share my screen, and while I do that, I'll have Madison or David drop a link to our How It Works page. Not that one, the How It Works. Thanks, down below. Yeah, thanks. Um, you can find more information about the licenses on this How It Works page. Okay, so give me just a second to share my screen here. Okay. And then, so here's a visual for our the licenses that we have and which licenses you might need depending on how you're using copyrighted music. So the first one I want to look at is the reprint license, and that's for using images of the congregational part of approved titles copyrighted by our member publishers during your worship services. The congregation part can be words alone or words plus music, as you prefer, as suits your worship needs. So some examples of reprint usage might include a paper worship aid with you can have a song sheet or a leaflet or a bulletin that's distributed for the worship service. It can also be a downloadable PDF. Maybe people can access it using a QR code in the sanctuary, or maybe there's a link on your website to a PDF bulletin, or maybe you mail the link or the file to your congregation. That's all covered by the reprint license. You could also use projection slides to share the congregational part. Another way that some license holders use the reprint permissions is in tandem with their podcast streaming license to embed images in a licensed online worship video. So if you have the podcast streaming permissions and the reprint license, what we call the reprint and podcast streaming bundle license, you can use those permissions to embed the congregational song in your licensed online worship video, words alone or words plus music. Okay, so that is reprint. And if the answer is yes, that you use reprint, then you would stick with the yes column and you'd go on down to the next set of questions. So the next license that we're going to talk about is the podcast streaming license. And that's a collection of permissions to share your worship services online on the internet using approved titles copyrighted by one licensed member publishers. And some ways that organizations might be doing that are live streaming their worship services to social media or their organization website or another internet platform. Maybe they're meeting on Zoom or by Google Meet for their worship services. And then whether the meeting is private or the link is publicly available, you're using copyrighted music on the internet during your worship service, so the podcast streaming license can cover that. You can also use the license permissions if you're pre-recording your worship service and posting that video, or maybe pre-recording parts of your worship service and then dropping them into your live stream service. I know a lot of us were using those solutions in the early days of the pandemic quarantine shutdowns. I don't know how much we're using them today, but in any case, the license would cover that type of usage. Perhaps you want to leave the video posted online for a length of time after the service, and you can do that as long as the license permissions are are still valid. That's considered an archived video, and archived videos can remain posted to an internet platform like social media, your YouTube channel or whatever, or your web hosting site or your organization website. So the permissions aren't just for posting new videos and then you have to take them down. Rather, the permissions allow you to leave the video posted as long as the license is renewed from year to year. You can store the videos in a shared drive like Dropbox or Google Drive. And you can, and then whether that whether that is public or private, and even if it's archived, as long as it's stored on the internet, the podcast streaming permissions can cover it. Okay, so that's podcast streaming for sharing worship videos over the internet. And then the last license to talk about is the recorded audio license. And this is a collection of permissions that allow you to use commercial and non-commercial recordings of approved titles from our member publishers during your worship services or for rehearsal purposes. So our 201 webinar from last year covered the recorded audio license in depth, and we'll drop a link to that webinar in the chat. I recommend that if you're looking for some good foundational information on the recorded audio license, that you have a look at that webinar. Okay, and some examples of recorded audio usage might include making and storing your own recordings. Maybe you want to make rehearsal tracks for your singers and instrumentalists to support their practice sessions outside your group rehearsals. Or maybe you want to record yourself playing the accompaniment track so that you can conduct the choir and you don't have to play and conduct at the same time. Or maybe you record your accompanist playing the choral anthem because they're going to be out of the town the weekend that the choir is singing that piece. So making and storing self-made non-commercial recordings for rehearsal or for use during worship. And then you can also use master recordings, the recordings that you purchase from the publisher. These are commercial recordings. And a church might purchase accompaniment tracks for a worship service. And if that worship service is posted online, then you can use your podcast streaming and your recorded audio permissions for that online worship service that uses the commercial recording. You can also use the commercial recording to make rehearsal tracks for your singers and instrumentalists. If you're using other people's YouTube videos, that would be an example of a non-commercial recording. It's not the publisher's recording, so it's not a commercial recording. It's a non-commercial recording, even though it wasn't made by you. It's not a self-made non-commercial recording, but it is a non-commercial recording. And in order to post the worship service online with that YouTube recording, you would need the recorded audio license as well as the podcast streaming license. And then you'd, for that YouTube video, you'd need additional permissions as well. So we're going to drop a link to a helpful resource for using other people's YouTube videos. You would need the permission of the video's owner as well as the owner or the performers on the video, in addition to the copyright holder's permission. One more thought about using someone else's YouTube video. You don't want to rely on someone else's statement on their YouTube channel that a song is covered by one license. We always encourage you to confirm one license coverage by searching the database for that song. So then you can use these permissions in tandem, depending on how you're using copyrighted music. All right, so I'm going to stop screen sharing here. That is a lot of information. David, do we have any questions about licensing options?
I see a question here. How do I report rehearsal recordings that I made for my singers and instrumentalists?
Yeah, so you can search for that title in the database, and if it's approved for recorded audio, let's see. So it's rehearsal and you're making the recordings. So those are non-commercial if you're like recording yourself, making their parts. So then you select report, and then there's an option to report recorded audio usage on that pop-up screen. And it's for, you would want practice and non-commercial. Let me share my screen, and having just narrated all that, let's look at that together. Actually, David, can I impose on you to share your screen? Sorry.
What do you need?
Do you have can you take us to a page in the customer interface? Can you open a screen in the customer?
Yeah, give me one
Okay.
second. We'll open up my test account.
Sorry, I should have set that up.
No, no worries. Okay, I got it. Perfect. Ta-da! Can everyone see? I'm on my test account.
Oh, great. And let's look at Bernadette Farrell's Christ Be Our Light.
I always forget how to spell her last name.
F-A-R-R. Farrell. I think that's right. Yep, there we go. Okay, and then can you click on report? And let's look at that pop-up
Yes.
screen. So
Amazing.
it's approved for recorded audio here,
Right.
both kinds, commercial and non-commercial. So when you go to report, you see recorded audio down toward the bottom there, and you have practice tracks because you made rehearsal tracks for your musicians, and you would record the number of tracks that you reported. And then because you made the recording, you'd check the bubble for non-commercial self-made and the number of tracks that you made. Thank you, David. I put you on the spot there.
No, no worries.
Good. All right. Um, good. Okay. Thanks. So then, David, back to you because we're going to have you. No, I'm sorry, that's not true. Madison, over to you. Madison's going to give us some helpful information about displaying your license permissions.
Thanks, Siobhan.
Yeah.
So yes, a question that comes up often is, okay, I have the license. I know I have the right license. I know these titles are covered. Now, how do I display my permissions? How do I let the world know that I am in fact licensed when I am reprinting or podcast streaming? So you will want to display permissions both when you are reprinting and when you are podcast streaming. So I'm going to go ahead and share an image here. Give me one moment. So when we talk about displaying our permissions, there are two important components to that. So first off, you're going to want to share the copyright information. So that's this block we see up top. So this is for every title that you are, whether you're reprinting or podcast streaming, you'll want to have the song title, the author, the copyright year, publisher, and this all rights reserved line. So this is for as many titles as you are sharing. If you have reprinted 5 titles, you will need 5 of these. So this is the copyright information. The other component is your one license licensing permission. So you'll see here we have reprint podcast streamed with permission under one license. And then we have an A with a bunch of zeros here, but you will want to replace that with your license number. So that's going to be a letter followed by 6 numbers. So you'll just replace that A and the zeros with your organization's license number. Now you'll notice at the top we have this reprinted podcast streamed. You will use the terms that are relevant to what you're doing. So if you are just reprinting, then you can omit the podcast streaming words there. You can just put reprinted with permission under your one license. If you're just podcast streaming, you can omit reprinted, or if you're doing all of it, you'll want to include all those words. So just kind of edit that line according to your organization and what you are doing. Turn that off for 1 minute. So let's talk about reprints for just a moment. So something we often see is a bulletin, for example. You're going to want to display the copyright information for each individual song that you are reprinting, but you only need to list your licensing information once in that bulletin. So a question that people often ask, is there any particular place or size that we need to put this licensing information? And the answer truly is just you want to make sure it's visible. So that I know many organizations like to put it at the very bottom or in the back. That is totally fine. It's just as long as it is visible to whoever is looking at that reprinted material, that you have your one license number in there, then that is okay. Same with the copyright information. You do want to make sure you have it for every title that's reprinted in there. But you can, put it where it's convenient and looks nice for your individualized reprinted material. Now, talking online, I have a link here. If Siobhan or David, you wouldn't mind dropping in the chat, we have a very helpful blog article that really does a deep dive into sharing things online and how to display your permissions online and give some really great examples of how to do so. I'm going to open it up here and share it as well so that we can kind of talk through it a little bit. Let me pull this up. So it's called Not Just a Quick Fix. And you can see there's a lot of different ways you can share your licensing and copyright information online, but the most important thing is going to be in the description of the video. So if you are posting on Facebook or YouTube, whether it's live or archived, you want to make sure you have both the copyright information and the licensing information in the description of your video. So if you look at number 1 here, there's an example. You can see the title of the work. You can see the author. You can see the copyright year. All that information is listed, the copyright information. And then down here at the bottom, it also says reprint and streamed with permission under one license with the license number listed, all rights reserved. So always, always, always in the description of the video is where you're going to want to put that. There's some other options that are really great to have in addition to the description. Something we see a lot is a slide at the beginning or the end of your service. You can list all the copyright information as well as that licensing line just on a slide at the beginning or the end, as we have an example here. Or also, if you have the ability to do so at your organization, an overlay. So kind of like a subtitle while the song is being performed that appears on the screen with that copyright information and the licensing line. That's a really great way to display those permissions as well. But again, you always want to make sure it's in the description. That's going to be your most important place to put it. And I will note too, there's many of the hosting sites such as Facebook and YouTube, they use bots to evaluate these posts and quickly and efficiently to try to make sure everything's licensed. And sometimes there's still going to be the possibility that your video will be flagged. But just because your video was flagged by social media doesn't mean you are in the wrong. So please don't panic if this does happen to you. Sometimes they're accurate, but sometimes it's a bot and it's, not quite accurate. Note that a flag or a claim are different than a strike, and you have no reason to worry if a claim is made on your account. If anything like this happens to your organization, please feel free to reach out to us with questions, and we're happy to talk you through that. We also have a blog article we'll share in the chat about managing claims. It's called Managing YouTube Claims, and it kind of talks through about what to do if something like that happens on your social media account. And while we don't know everything about the inner workings of the social media sites, we can confirm that if you are following the correct practices, and by that I mean you have the right one license, you're paying your invoice, you've ensured your titles are covered through us, you're reporting your usage, and you're displaying that copyright and licensing information, you're doing everything that you need to do to be copyright compliant. Are we receiving any questions?
Seeing any. David, I'm not seeing any questions there, are you?
I am not.
Okay. We do have some questions not on that topic, so maybe those questions will come in a minute. But we do have a question from the previous section. So Allison is asking, can you clarify about putting our order of service with hymn lyrics on our church website? The reprint license does allow you to post your order of service does allow you to post your reprinted words or words plus music on your website. You can, ideally it's behind a password protection, so it's not just out there for, everyone on the internet to see, but that's not required. That's just suggested. You can post a link to a PDF. You can post the PDF itself. You can email the link or the file to your parishioners. The reprint license allows you to do that. Great. Okay, so Madison, that was great. Okay, so David is going to talk now about what to pay attention to, what's important when reading copyright information.
Perfect. All right. Hi, everyone. Okay. So I'm going to be going over copyright claims and the information that we can find off of them. Okay, so I'll start with what we all know because we're all amazing license holders and we've been to all of the one licensing majingies. We know that if a title, we hear it all the time too in our emails and phone calls. If a title is copyrighted by one licensed member publisher, that title can be covered by one license, right? One license only covers Yeah, titles that are, copyrighted by one licensed member publishers. So in my section, what we're going to go into is let's dive into that statement and open it up a little bit. So we ask ourselves, well, how do we know if a title is copyrighted by a one licensed member publisher? So we start by looking at the copyright claim. And if you're asking yourself what a copyright claim is, you usually can typically find it at the bottom of the page on which the title is printed. Sometimes hymnals or songbooks will have a separate like index or appendix that lists all the copyright claims. But it's that little citation that you see at the bottom of the page where it has the copyright year, the copyright symbol, the copyright year, and then like a publisher. That's a copyright claim. So now that we're looking at the copyright claim, or we know to look at the copyright claim, let's take our statement, titles copyrighted by one licensed member publishers can be covered by one license. Let's break that down a bit and say, let's break down titles or songs into individual components, because within a single title, you can separate that title or song into text and tune. Right? So now we have individual components of titles that can be copyrighted. A lot of the time they're copyrighted by the same entity. Sometimes they're copyrighted by different entities. And so it's really important to look at that copyright claim and figure out which component is copyrighted by who. We're going to focus right now on text and tune, separating a song into its text and its tune, because that's usually typically the only two that we want to worry about. And so there are different combinations that may exist. If we think about public domain, right? And we all know public domain components, anything in the public domain is free to use. No permissions are required. So if we're back in this framework of text and tune, we have different combinations. I have different combinations that I'm going to throw at you. So within a single song, within a single title, we can have a copyrighted text and a copyrighted tune. That's one combination. We can have a public domain text that's free to use and a public domain tune. And if we have that, then the whole song is free to use without permissions. That's another combination. A third combination is a public domain text but a copyrighted tune. So in that case, we would have to get permission for the copyrighted component. So even though the text would be free to use, because the tune is copyrighted, we would then have to seek permission to use that tune. Make sense? And then the fourth combination that I have is a copyrighted text, but a public domain tune. So the tune is free to use, but the text is copyrighted. So now we have to get permissions for that text. I know that's a lot, but we're going to look at that shortly. Okay, so those are the combinations. So now we're asking ourselves, why is it important to look at these separate components when we're trying to, either reprint or to use these titles in our online worship services or things like that? It's because anything copyrighted, we need to obtain the permissions from that copyright holder. So the step that we're trying to get you to is, instead of thinking of a song as the big, just one title, we want to also look at the components of that song. All right, I'm running around in circles, but that's all right. All right, so text or tune. Okay. All right, so let's look at some different combos that I pulled up for you all. Okay, our favorite example, let me share my screen, that we use all the time, is, if you've been to any of our webinars, we use this at least once every single webinar, and I am continuing that tradition. Okay, so the first combo that I talked about was copyrighted text, copyrighted tune. And of course, I'm going to look at Marty Haugen's All Are Welcome. Woo, woo, woo. So I pulled up the downloadable file that is, graciously available through our one license database by the member publisher. If you scroll down, I know this is super tiny, but if you can see it, it says text, Marty Haugen. Tune, Two Oaks with a refrain, Marty Haugen, right? And then there's one copyright here claim. It says 1994 GIA Publications. So in this case, both text and tune are held by GIA. And then if it's too small, I'm going to go to the database entry, which is here. And then you actually see it here. right? Tune 1994 GIA, text 1994 GIA. So both text and tune are copyrighted, and it's covered by one license. Why? Because GIA is a one license member publisher. Woo woo woo. So looking at those separate components, because GIA holds them, and is choosing to license this particular title through one license covers it, and you would just report this if you're reprinting or podcast streaming or audio recording. Make sense? So that's the first combo, which was copyrighted text, copyrighted tune. Okay, next combo we're going to look at is the complete, if there were opposites, it's a complete opposite, which is public domain text, public domain tune, right? So we're looking at All Things Bright and Beautiful, tune Royal Oak. So if you look down here, the text is here, right? And then the music's here, traditional English melody. There's no copyright symbol. Oh, let's drop that, if Siobhan or Madison, if one of you can drop that public domain article. These are good signs that these are in the public domain. There's no copyright symbol. This says traditional English melody. Alexander here died in 1895. So that's well over the amount of time after the text writer's death that would be in the public domain. But yeah, so this is an example of a title that you can use freely without having to report. And you're asking yourself, well, why is it available on the One License website? Because a member publisher had downloadable files that they wanted to graciously share with y'all, and then you all can use this one if you wanted to for your worship aids. Make sense? So we looked at copyrighted text, copyrighted tune, and now we're looking at public domain text, public domain tune. Third combo that I'm throwing at you, if I remember, is public domain text, but copyrighted tune. So this is the same text as the last one. Hopefully I didn't come. Oh yeah, see, all things bright and beautiful. All things bright and beautiful. All creatures great and small. All things blah 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 blah. You can read, right? Perfect. And if we look, it's the same words, but it's a different tune. The melody's different. And if we go down to the bottom and look at the copyright claim, the text is the same, right? It says Alexander. But then music, there's a copyright symbol here, 1992, Laura Wasson. Ooh, hope I'm pronouncing that right. And it says published by OCP. So the music is copyrighted. Therefore, we need permissions from that copyright holder to use this music, right? Even though the text is free to use. But because it's a component of the song, we need permissions, right, to use this song. And it's an OCP title. Laura Wasson holds the copyright, published by OCP. So OCP has agreements with Laura to license through one license. So it's theirs. So there's that. So this is the third combination that we're looking at. So we went through copyrighted text, copyrighted tune. Second, we looked at public domain text, public domain tune. This is the third one that we're looking at with public domain text and copyrighted tune. And then the fourth combo that I have for you is public domain tune, copyrighted text. So if you look at we have so many articles on our blog right now with public domain tunes that our colleague Stephanie wrote. You can check that out on our blog. So I just looked up St. Columba, and then all these titles came up, right? So even though St. Columba is in the public domain, and a bunch of titles use St. Columba, right? So we have Oh Breathe on Me, Oh Breath of God. I think this is public domain, public domain. I just want to look to see. Yeah, so this is public domain, correct? But here, if we look here, this particular title, The King of Love My Shepherd Is, it's pointed out for you. I pick composers with last names I can't pronounce. Dubruyne, hopefully.
Brian.
Dubruyne. Thank you, Spot. So we have Dubruyne's arrangement here. Because the arrangement of... Wait, David, get your life together. Oh, yeah. Because the music here is copyrighted. The arrangement... Okay, this is tricky. The arrangement of the public domain tune is copyrighted. Therefore, we need permissions from the copyright holder of that arrangement. Make sense? In this one, The King of Love My Shepherd Is, that text is public domain. And then this music the arrangement of the public domain tune is copyrighted. So we need to use that. And that is a whole separate topic that we can get into. There is I know I'm putting you on the spot, but there is a webinar somewhere where we talk about derivative arrangements, where we talked about that. But a copyrighted arrangement of a public domain tune, you'd have to report that. So this fourth example is public domain text. Oh no, this is still the third example, public domain text copyrighted tune. It's also the same as this one, right? I added two because I like to make my life difficult for myself. So this is the same situation as All Things Bright and Beautiful, Scarlet Oak, which was public domain text, copyrighted tune. Make sense? Sorry. That's still third example. Now the final example that we're looking at is a copyrighted text public domain tune. So this text, or this tune is texted, which is also a public domain tune. So this tune is free to use, public domain, blah, blah, blah. However, this text by MD Rich is copyrighted. So we need permissions to use this text. OCP is here, held by MD Rich. Ta-da! So that's the fourth example. I know that was a lot, and I threw all of that at you in a short amount of time, but basically, if you walk away from my section, what I want to summarize is that individual titles can have multiple components, and each component can either be in the public domain or copyrighted, sometimes copyrighted by the same entities, sometimes copyrighted by separate entities, but it's good to look at those individual components so that we know specifically where to look for the permissions that we need to use that one title. Ta-da! Questions?
Thanks, David. Yeah, we do have a question. This is actually related to the earlier section with Madison. So I'll have Madison answer this one. Allison asks, what's the best practice for a podcast where there is no place to put a description? What's the best practice to put the copyright info and that it is podcast with permission under our one license number?
That's a great question. And Allison, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm thinking you're referring to like a strictly audio podcast where there is no video to display a slide or information like an overlay such as that. In which case, I would suggest reading the copyright information and your licensing information so that it's audibly heard in the podcast. So you would use that same terminology that we showed in the displaying permissions, but instead of just displaying it or copying paste it in a description, read it out loud, read the license number out loud, read all of that in the podcast so that it can be heard. And then wherever you're posting the podcast, maybe on your website, if there's an ability to put a description or a note there, on whatever the hosting site is, then I would try to put that information there as well. But definitely just try to make it audibly heard in the podcast. And then if you can slip it in a description wherever you're hosting, that would be great as well too. But great question.
Yeah, thanks. Good. All right. So then are we seeing any other questions on the in the chat while you guys are checking that out? I copied a couple questions here. So we had a question, my church's promotional video using copyrighted music that our congregation is singing. I guess the question is, can this be covered by one license permissions? So since it's a promo video and not a worship service video, it can't be covered. One license permissions can cover worship services, or in the case of recorded audio, also those rehearsal tracks getting ready for rehearsal, right? But it can't cover things that don't include substantial worship elements. It's the one license permissions are for worship services and for certain ways that copyrighted music is used in worship services. So for a promotional video, even though it's your congregation singing, you'd want to go to that copyright holder directly, the copyright holder of that song. You want to go to them directly for permission. Or you might consider recording the congregation singing something that's in the public domain with public domain accompaniment And if the choir is singing a harmony with that, choose a non-copyrighted arrangement or have the choir in unison, so that you don't need additional permissions for the promotional video. All right, are we seeing other questions there?
There's one in the Q&A, Siobhan.
Yeah.
It says, I'm reprinting a hymn from our own hymnal published by our organization. The reason we reprint it is we don't want to use the hymnal. Do I need to report the usage?
Yeah, so I think we need a little more information there. So the hymn that you want to reprint, the hymn that you want to use in that way, if it's copyrighted, then you do need the the copyright holder's permission to make that reprint. Sounds like you're saying our hymnal published by our organization. I wonder if you mean it's published by your denomination. So a hymnal that's published, even by a denominational publisher or a secular publisher. A hymnal includes some information, I'm sorry, some songs that are copyrighted by the hymnal publisher, and some that are in the public domain, and some that are copyrighted by other entities. So if the hymnal publisher gives you permission to reprint their own copyrights, that's one thing. Hymnal publishers don't always do that, but some denominational publishers do. I would say, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, but Valdek, I would say, if you can send us an email at info@onelicense.net, we'll drop that contact information into the chat again. If you could send us an email, I think we just need a little more information from you. We can speak in general terms about copyright usage up to a point, but because copyrights are associated with individual titles, at a certain point in the question, we need to have more exact information because we're talking about this song. We can speak generally about what you can do with copyrighted music, but then there are specific things depending on, the song and what the copyright holder chooses. So yeah, so send us an email about that. It
You know
looks
what,
like
Siobhan?
yeah, go ahead.
That also brings up because sorry, Valdek, if it also brings up a question about maybe Valdek means like a supplemental hymnal. Like, what if they were making a supplemental hymnal where they are
Yeah,
picking and choosing titles from a hymnal into their own little booklet? If a church were to do that, would they need permissions for that?
that's correct. Right. Yeah. If you're reprinting copyrighted music, even into your own, into it like a reusable songbook, if you're reprinting copyrighted music, you need permission to do that. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to ask Algona Presbyterian, can you type your question into the chat? We can't take live questions. Great. Okay, and while that's happening, I think I have another question here from the registration documents. I play at several different churches and would like to be able to provide song sheets at the various churches. What kind of a license do I need? So it's the church and not the musician that needs to be covered for this type of usage. And the individual's license wouldn't cover the church. The church needs its own license for using copyrighted music for reprint during a worship service. I invite you, I can help you with that, or someone on our team, me or someone can help you with that. So if you can send us an email at info@onelicense.net, we need just a little more information, then we can help you, see what your options are for that. Okay. How are we doing on questions? Do we have others? We're happy to stay. We've got about 10 more minutes in our 1 hour time period, and we're certainly happy to stay for that and answer any of your questions. So, feel free to pop those into the Q&A box.
I see a question in the chat, Madison, for displaying permissions and stuff. Does the citation need to be attached to each piece, or can it be more like a bibliography at the end of the bulletin?
So you can put that copyright information wherever makes sense for your organization and your reprinted material. So some organizations do like to have, on the back that just list all of their copyright information and their licensing information. Some organizations like to do it with each individual title. As long as it is clearly visible on your reprinted material or online, then you're doing the right thing. But it does not need to be in any specific place or order, just whatever makes sense for you. And as long as it's visible, then you are doing the right thing.
Okay, so I saw another question like this in the Q&A, and then we did get this question um, by email leading up to this webinar. So the question is, how do I report rehearsal recordings that I made for my singers and instrumentalists? And I think if one of you can check in the Q, I think we responded to this in Q&A, but if the question was slightly different, if you could just double check that. The way to report rehearsal recordings is you report the number of tracks that you make. So it's sort of like reporting, one song for one service. So you make a track, a rehearsal track for your group. And let's say that you record the accompaniment so that people can practice on their own with the accompaniment, right? Singers or instrumentalists can practice like that's one track. And you report that usage when you make the track. And then let's say that in addition to that accompaniment track that you make for everybody, you record the 4 voice parts. So that's one track for the accompaniment and 4 for the voices. So now you've made 5 tracks. And so you're going to report rehearsal, non-commercial 5 for that title, right? And then if you make more, then more of that. And let's see, I think we shared the recorded audio webinar. I'm sorry, recorded audio blog post, recorded audio license, but maybe we could share that one again. And we also have a blog post for mixed usage reporting that addresses that. Maybe we could share those two in the chat, please and thank you. I'm getting nods. Thank you so much.
We had a question just come through the Q&A, again about displaying permissions and doing so via webcam and how you would display your permissions via a webcam. So I'm thinking the situation is perhaps like a Zoom call type, and feel free to provide more information if I'm wrong. In which case, so I'm thinking probably not a chance to display it in the description. So you would want to create a slide maybe to display on your screen that you could zoom in for your with the camera. That would be one way of doing that with all that copyright information and licensing information to get that visible on the live stream and the video. And just in general, if you have any questions about what's going on at your organization and what you're doing, what platform you're using, and how best to display those permissions, feel free to email us at info@onelicense.net and we can kind of talk through your situation at your organization to make sure that you're doing the right things if you have any more questions that are particular to your organization. But yeah, hopefully that answered your question. I would display it on the screen and make sure you're trying to zoom in so that it's visible in the video.
That's great. Thanks, Melissa. Joan asks, if we reprint lyrics of a hymn in the bulletin and sing it to an alternate tune, and both are in our pew hymnal, do we need to request permission? We do that to avoid page flipping awkwardness during worship. So if you reprint a copyrighted text or tune for whatever reason, you need permission to do that. So if it's, you can double check if it's covered by your one license permissions. And then if it is, then you know you have permission and you can report usage. But if it's not in the database, then you'd want to contact that copyright holder directly for permission. There. Good. All right. So I think I have one more question here. Can we post a video of some of the songs from a worship service, not the whole worship service? Under the podcast streaming license, it has to be the whole worship service. You can't use the podcast streaming permissions to post individual songs or a collection of individual songs. So you'd want to post the whole worship service. All right. So David, can you wrap us up here?
Yeah, of course. There's a question. Cora, we have time for this one.
Sure.
Coral, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Unfortunately, this will be, so the webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our blog. We'll see that announcement in the July newsletter. So there will be, yes. So the answer is yes. You will be able to access this recording on the One License blog, which is news.onelicense.net. Woo woo! All right, thank you all for asking such excellent questions. If we're not able to get to your question today, please send us an email at info@onelicense.net. You'll likely get an email from one of us three or one of the other three members of our team. Yes, and if you log into your account and submit your question through account contact, that's another way that you can do it also. Please take a moment to respond to the survey that will pop up in your browser as you log out of the webinar today. We'd really appreciate any feedback that you'd like to offer.
Yeah, and thank you, David and Madison, for your work here and for the care that you offer in support of our license holders. And thank you to our license holders who have joined us today who may be watching this recording. We really do appreciate your attention today, and we hope that this webinar helps you use our service to support your ministries. But even more importantly, we appreciate your protection of the copyrighted work of others, ensuring that they're properly credited and compensated for the usage of their creative labor. As we mentioned earlier, as David just confirmed, this webinar recording will be available on our blog in the next few days. So remember to reference the fast facts sheet. Could one of you drop that link one more time, as well as our contact information? The fast facts sheet includes a summary of the information from our time together today, and we'll include that sheet on the blog with the recording as well. So on behalf of the Global One License team, and I wish you well in the coming season. Thanks so much. Goodbye, all.